Welcome to Tea with Myrtis, Artistically Speaking, a series of conversations with artists featured in the Women Heal Through Rite and Ritual exhibition. Today's guest is multimedia artist Oletha DeVane, who uses repurposed materials in her creation of sculpture and totems to address social, political, and spiritual concerns. Welcome, Oletha. Thank you for joining me for tea time.
Thank you, Myrtis. Actually, I brought my tea.
Thank you. Pinky up. Good to see you virtually. So we are meeting via the computer because the virus has prevented us from coming together, from convening in person. And one of the questions that I've posed to each one of the artists who are featured in the show is how the pandemic has impacted, or if it has, their artistic production.
Well, I can tell you it hasn't impacted in any way that I can clarify. I actually loved being in the situation that I'm in because it gave me more studio time. And one of the things that I've been able to do during this particular period is really focus, on the work, a new body of work. It's allowed me to explore some of the ideas and issues that I wanted to explore in painting. And so I haven't stopped. That's all I can do. I haven't stopped.
Good. Now you're fortunate in that your studio is built onto your home. Is that correct?
That's exactly it.
Mm-hmm.
Up in the morning, I make our breakfast, coffee, and then I can go right upstairs to the studio, which is located in a little section off of the house. My husband built it 10 years ago. So for me, it's like, I try not to come down in my pajamas, but sometimes I don't mind doing that either.
I love that. I love that. So let's move on and talk about you as an artist and where that began in your life.
Oh my God. I think, if I go back to the very early beginnings, I think we used to go to Virginia to visit my grandparents. And of course, there were lots of cousins and stuff. And I pretty much liked being alone. I was one of those kids who, I love play, but I wasn't really physically, energetic in that way. So I would sit in the driveway at about 5 or 6 years old, and I would do drawings because they had this huge sand patch that was, part of the house. And so of course I would sit there and find a stick and do my drawings, and everybody would be amazed. So I continue to really think about how that played into just my sort of confidence.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the things that I remember. And my parents, of course, were incredibly supportive. My dad was an artist, or I should say, aspired to be an artist.
Mm-hmm.
And so his emphasis a lot of times would be on, taking us on walks and trying to get us to look at nature and to understand, just basically not only how things grew, but when we would go searching for things, I guess I was 9 or 10 years old, he would take us up to the hills of Western Maryland, and we would find rocks, and they had to be shiny rocks.
Mm-hmm.
So those shiny rocks were sort of the kind of materials that were inspiring only because they had mica chips in them. They were beautiful, and that's what he would have us look for. So
that's great. So let's talk a little bit about your creative process. And before we do, I'm going to read an excerpt from an essay that Dr. Leslie King Hammond wrote on the occasion of your Traces of the Spirit exhibition with the Baltimore Museum of Art. It's titled, "The Essence of Being Lies Within Ordinary, Useful, Less Stuff, and tangible things. And in it, Doc King Hammond really beautifully contextualizes your work. So it reads, many of DeVane's quarries into her art-making processes are not unlike those of an archaeologist who excavates sites, seeking tangible remnants and objects to reconstruct the meaning of past lives, civilizations, and cultures. And for me, in essence, it says that from the moment an item is formed, it possesses the energy of its creator and those who interact with it, and the stories of those encounters. So I think your work resonates with me so deeply because I see in it the genius in your ability to reimagine the life of materials and use it to address those issues that concern you. So can you talk to us about where you source your materials, what drives the decisions in terms of what is used, and then the techniques that you apply to create the work?
Well, the source material could be just about anything, but they started with bottles in this particular series of spirit sculptures.
Mhm.
I think it's kind of interesting because Doc Hammond was the one who gave me a lot of the bottles and said, you need to do something with these. But she saw some of the earlier work too. There was a show that was called New Voodoo, which was with William Rhodes and Joyce Scott and a couple of other people, that was curated by Amy Raish years ago. It was like 2009, I think. And out of that particular uh, era, for me, I had started working with the bottles like in 2007. William Rhodes gave me a bottle that was from Haiti that had what I considered at that time a figure of the Madonna, but of course she was a Black Madonna. And I ended up really thinking about what that whole concept meant to me in terms of women, in terms of mothers, in terms of just some of the concepts behind it. At any rate, that bottle, I think, was the impetus for a lot of research and a lot of understanding about loas and spirits out of Haitian art. And so the source materials can be as varied as, going to a thrift shop and finding stuff that kind of speaks to me within the context of what it could be used for. It evolved to receiving, bottles from friends, but it moved beyond bottles. It moved into a whole nother way of looking at and trying to bring ideas together about what I found. And sometimes I would go to, I don't know, junk stores, or I would order something online because I was really interested in adding something to a particular piece that I didn't have at the time.
Mhm.
So all of it becomes a fairly intuitive process for me,
Mhm.
where and how to put things together that really kind of speak to one another. So for me, it really is digging deep to establish a relationship with the materials that I find.
And there are times, are there not, when you actually create a piece
Mm-hmm.
that you incorporate into the work itself?
Yeah.
And what would that be?
It might be because I can work in just about any medium. Clay,
Mhm.
I might use a clay form that I've created, or I might use um, flowers that I've, beaded or created.
Mhm.
It might be, again, it's looking for what the relationships might be between the idea that I'm trying to express and how to bring those elements together. So I will create things that incorporate my own ideas about what the piece might be about in order for it to generate what I feel is a spiritual connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the figurative aspect of that sometimes I resort to that because I really believe that our bodies are vessels. They're actually temples, and that's the way we have to, for me, focus on that idea of bringing in the figurative if I'm going to use it,
Mm-hmm.
for the piece.
And so, in assembling those elements, what techniques do you use?
Oh my God. I bother my husband to build my basement, build my platforms,
Yes.
that's his job. And I use lots of adhesives, different kinds of adhesives, really. I'm not what I consider to be a bead artist. I'm not,
Mm-hmm.
but I will glue a bead on in a heartbeat. So that's just, my approach to the materials in many ways, so that if I find that it works visually, then I'm going to put it together. Right now, I'm working on a piece entitled Mawu, or actually a moon goddess. And it's fascinating because I use rope for her hair, right?
Yes.
Sometimes I've used my cousin's hair, who she gave me all her dreadlocks. So I have a whole bunch of her dreadlocks, but I didn't use this particular piece. But anyway, I find sometimes the natural materials for me are ones that speak to the need of the piece. And then I also created a face for this piece that's covered in beads. And it really works for me in terms of being able to conceptualize what a moon goddess would be in African culture.
Mm-hmm. So it's a combination of assemblage, bricolage. Are there times when you sew the beads together, or are they mostly glued?
Um, they're mostly glued, and for
Mm-hmm.
the most part, I find beaded fabric. I'll use beaded. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
anybody that has beaded fabric, I'll take it because I'll cut it up, and use it if I feel like it's going to fit the piece that I'm working on. But yeah, I mean, I try to be as open as I can to materials, because I think materials in some ways signify certain things, they
Mm-hmm.
signify certain meanings.
Mm.
I'm not always sure what that is, but
Yes.
I think I look at it as a way of establishing what my painting roots are, um, by looking at colors and looking at textures and looking at the way things go together. So that's how I approach it when I'm in the studio.
Yeah, it's the execution is amazing. It's really beautiful. Um, so let's talk a little bit about your influences, that being the African diasporic aesthetic and its spiritual and religious practices. How does that impact what you do, your thought process in creating, and then how does that manifest itself in the work?
Well, let me start by saying I grew up believing that religion is very limited in some ways,
Mm,
especially from the point of view of somebody telling you what you're to do and who you are. That whole discovery of that inner voice is incredibly important, or was to me, because I think at 9 years old, I was really questioning, a lot of it at 9. And when my parents moved to Howard County, the one thing that my dad was really significant, and my mom too, really significant in, even though they grew up in families that were, Baptist, highly religious. My grandfather were deacons and stuff. They said, if you don't search for yourself, you're never going to find out anything. Religion is not about what you learn in the church. And I remember learning a lot about the Baha'i faith, and I became a Baha'i. That was my education into the vastness and the importance of what religion is, and the fact that every culture, because we were taught for the most part that you go to hell if you weren't a Christian.
Yes.
And so my curiosity was about, how is it that we find out about a lot of religious practices that, are not a part of our culture, because the world is a vast world. It's a big, big place. And not everybody believes the same. So the Baha'i faith taught me an incredible amount about what practices were, what beliefs were, what investigation was. Investigate the truth for oneself was a really large part of the tenets. And so I certainly went in my travels with a relatively open mind about what it was I would find within various cultures. And so when I went to Thailand, which was predominantly Buddhist, I went to the temples. When I went to South Africa, I met with people who were practicing, their religion. I haven't been to the West Coast of Africa, but I know a lot of people from the West Coast. So my curiosity was really about how faith and how we're taught and why we're taught in certain ways. And those influences for me were about developing a world view of how to conceptualize the spirit, really. I mean, I'm not a practitioner of voodoo, but I really understand why it exists and what is important about it, and how it traveled from the west of Africa, to the United States. We all have this understanding. And my father, again, was relatively instrumental, because in his growing up, he said that his mom, his adopted mom, was a voodooist. She was someone who, and he was always afraid. He was afraid of it. He didn't want me to even explore that as an idea. But even in their relative openness as believers, they were fairly instrumental in my understanding of what faith is about.
Did your father ever express why he feared voodoo? Because there are stigmas attached to it as being a dark, cultish religion and practice.
I think when he was a child, what happened to him was they would go to, he was from North Carolina, and they would go to it within the woods, to practice their faith. And he felt that people would try to do things, would attempt to do things that were dark, really. And I don't, there is a dark side to personally to every religion.
Absolutely there is. When we're killing people in the name of God, I think that's pretty concerning.
So there's a dark side to it all. But I think those were the things that were things that he did not like. And for the most part, it was the hexes, and he always felt that he was not a superstitious man, but he said was very clear about what he felt was, the light, moving towards the light is his conceptual framework. Anyway, I remember thinking about even in Haiti, I was at a voodoo ceremony, um, and it wasn't dark. It was celebratory. You know, there were things that were celebrated that were about life and about nature and about understanding uh, what might be considered a source. You know, because our first inclination is to worship nature.
Yes.
Our first inclination. And the other thing is to look towards the sun, you know,
Mm-hmm.
as a source of life, to look towards the moon as a source of life, you know. So I think in terms of human existence, we have this need that, you know, if we don't understand something, we move towards what we see.
Yes. And what we don't understand, we also tend to fear.
We tend to see it.
And I think that that can be problematic. It can stifle our growth. It can, out of that fear, create racism and stereotypes that can be detrimental to the whole human race. So, Oletha, I've lost your audio.
Oh,
Okay, now you're back. I don't know what happened, but we're good now.
okay.
So let's talk about deities because they appear in your work. And Urzali was created in a totemic form. And I wanted to know, well, you touched upon it a little bit in terms of the vessels and the bottles, but what was the impetus for the creation of this piece? And it sits to my right, my far right in this, on the screen.
Well, first of all, I felt lucky to have found the materials that I did find because I did find that particular bottle in a thrift shop.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's so beautiful.
I must admit, I didn't blow the glass or nothing.
Okay.
You know, it fell within the concepts that I was working with, because the piece at the museum is a saint. I consider it a saint piece for my city, saint for my city. But Urzali uh, is a Haitian Loa, which is a spirit. I always look to, and I try to find for myself a kind of female representation of that. I love that particular piece because it allowed me to play with the beads that I had and the flowers that I had, and the base on which it sits is actually something that I also found in a thrift shop.
Mm,
Concept of putting these two elements together to encase her, to protect her. Um, she's a spirit of love, you know, a spirit that is incredibly giving. Uh, and so my ability to play with that aspect of it was delightful for me.
yeah, she sits in what appears to me as a shrine, and it's a really touching piece. Another in Another work that's in the exhibition is Sanctuary. This piece really fascinates me. So I'd like for you to talk about the elements and the symbolic meaning of three particular elements, and those are the keys, the bullet casings, and the apple. And that's the short list of what appears.
I say there's a lot of
Yeah.
well, for the bullet casings, we have, as a community, especially, you know, in the city, have been going through a lot of deaths through, you know, violence. And I sometimes use the bullets as a way to think about those people who've
Mm,
lost. Um, the keys represent what I would hope would be the opening of the souls, or the opening to a place They seem to represent the possibility, possibilities of finding a way. And I'm not sure that all that reads to everybody who looks at those things.
Yeah, what's important is that that was your intention. We will all come with our own experiences to bear when viewing a work.
I do think that keys represent, all of that in terms of openings and secrets, opening the doors to secrets, opening the doors.
Mm.
That's how I use them, but I don't use them that often. And I laugh because I think of Schroeder, who used
Yes.
all the time. And we had a conversation about it, because he used it a little differently. But the interior of that space, the apple, represented for me the Black body. And the idea of a sanctuary is that, again, it's about refuge and about a place to be, a place that's safe.
Mm-hmm.
I want us safe. I do want that, not so much in the security kind of sense, but in the spiritual kind of sense, because I do think that as Black people, we don't realize our significance on this.
Can you say that again? You faded out once again.
I said, I don't know if we realize as Black people our significance on this planet.
Mm.
And one thing that makes me continue to be a Baha'i is because we are considered the pupil of the eye. And that is a very significant statement, in that the eye is for seeing and it's for revealing. And we're walking blind right now, and that scares me.
Yes.
So.
Wow. And so I'd also like for you to speak about two other works in the exhibition. One is Spring, which is to my left.
Mm-hmm.
And that piece is visually arresting and just very compelling. So I would really like for you to take us through the various elements and the meaning of that particular piece.
Oh, wow. Spring is, all I can say is that when I did that piece, I was so depressed.
Really?
Yeah.
The colors are so vibrant, it's so alive. So I'm very surprised to hear you say that it came out of
Yeah,
those emotions, was born out of those emotions.
February, it was dark. It's like today almost, every day
Mm-hmm.
be just gray. And I think I have this sort of seasonal depression or something, but
Mm-hmm.
I remember thinking I need to do something that's bright and not heavy. And, for me, spring, certainly like for everyone, it's about change. It's about growth. It's about newness. And so I had all these incredible, flowers that I use on pieces sometimes. And I thought, I'm going to just pack this thing with flowers. And the other piece, the top of the piece, is a piece that I did at Haystack, a casting of a face that I created, which really is sort of a pink sun at that point. But I just, there's no deeper meaning than that. It just so happened to have come out of a period when I felt really like I needed to raise my own spirits in order to maybe get through that day or something.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's beautiful. It's compelling. I really love it. It's one of my favorites. Of course, on any given day, then Sanctuary is my favorite. I love the fact that the black apple represents the black body, and it's housed such that in a safe place. And you've built a home, it's housed within a house. and it's really speaks volumes, especially when you break down the meaning of the various materials that you used to create it. But beyond your sculptural work and the sanctuaries, you are also a printmaker. And Harriet and Sweetgum is one of your prints that's featured in the show. And can you tell us about the process you used to create that and then the meaning behind that particular piece?
That series comes out of a favorite of mine. Sweet gum, the sweet gum tree is the background for that piece, and that was done digitally. I have some
Okay.
that were created using, that particular image, that digital image, so that I could actually do solar etching on top of it. When I got the image, when that image of Harriet came out, of her younger self, right? We were like, oh my God, this is amazing. Somebody apparently, I guess Smithsonian has the actual image now.
Yes.
I remember it being in the newspaper or something. And I just was so excited because I think there are a number of us as African American artists have been doing stuff on Harriet.
And we should say Harriet Tubman for those who may not know the Harriet you're referencing.
Thank you for coming. Led people from Maryland, from the Eastern Shore of Maryland, to freedom. The sweet gum was the obstacle, because when you look at that particular seed pod, it was spiky. It was like anything that one could really dismiss and not walk on if you were walking on it barefoot.
Yes.
That was a real issue. So I have used sweet gum in a number of my installations and exhibitions, but I wanted to incorporate it in this particular print because it reminded me so much of what Kate Larson described in her book, that it was a bed of nails. It felt like a bed of nails. Usually when I do an installation, if I can convince people to walk on it, they'll know what it feels like.
Yeah, I've had the occasion to do so.
Mhm.
As a child, my grandparents had trees in their yard that grew those pods, those burls, and it's painful.
So,
So I understood the metaphor.
that's exactly it. It's a metaphor for that obstacle.
Yes.
I expect it to be, because it was used medicinally as well. And once I understood the sweet gum itself, because all over the Eastern Shore and literally through the Eastern seaboard, that tree exists. When I was in South Africa, I came across sweet gum and I couldn't believe it. I thought, what is it
Mm,
going here? So it really made me want to go back and investigate where the sweet gum tree came from. I still haven't found that out. But it really is, when I use it in a print, or if I'm drawing it, or if I'm using it in an installation, it's to represent difficulty and how we how resilient we are, because that tree set up all kinds of ways to be used besides being painful.
wow. Well, thank you, Oletha, for providing this fascinating conversation and great meaning and understanding to your work. Um, it has been a joy to talk with you today. Thank you for joining me for tea time.
Good.
And when the pandemic allows, we are going to throw a big opening reception here in the gallery. I cannot wait to share this amazing exhibition with the Baltimore community and the world. So until then, take care and be well.